Okay. It should be recording now. Yes. Okay. So, like I mentioned, there was in May 13th and May 14th, the Science State Organization put on a webinar called The Tale of Two Teachers. And it was about two teachers in Ohio and sort of the ways that they came up with for organizing everything with online learning. In the fall, I was just looking at the news. They want to have kids back in the classroom in the fall, but again, it's going to be sort of local, whether it's if everybody comes back, if it's a mixture or whatever. So we're trying to support the teachers in whatever scenario there is. We're trying to offer you support for this. So the one that I'm going to focus on today, there was one on digital notebooks, which you can get both links on the ODE. If you go to the ODE main page and you type in the search box virtual meetups, you'll see the links for all of these, for all the meetups, including the recordings for these. I'm going to focus on the grid one today because Terry and I were looking at it and we thought it had some potential for world languages, especially sort of going the way things are with, kids having to do things at their own pace, etc. So before I jump into us sort of brainstorming, I just wanted to open it up. And again, if you want to say something, just type share or type a message in the chat box. I don't know if you had a chance to go in and either watch the recording or take a look at there were some free resources for the grid method, but I'm just wondering, just off the cuff, for anyone who took a look at that grid, mastery grid, what were your thoughts? Did it look like something that you thought, oh yeah, I could see this working, or I see some issues with it? So I just want to open that up before we move into brainstorming and just sort of get some feedback on what you thought about this grid method.
Kathy, I went in, I took the free course that was offered, and it was very good. It only took maybe an hour and a half. It is very much geared for, the course is geared for those kind of subject areas that have things that you master in a period of time, like science or math. And from that perspective, I think we would have to make a lot of adjustments because, with language takes much more time. You can't just do something, teach it, and then be done with it. So from that perspective, I think you need to look at it. But it's a great organizational tool for people who like to organize in grids.
Okay, so something a little bit more spiraled versus specific content. Okay, good. Anybody else want to share when they looked at the video or the slideshow didn't have a whole lot in it unless you went to the actual website. Yeah, Kat Zetz, do you want to share? Just unmute yourself.
And I
You're good.
Did go through the original webinar,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things my students came back to me with in a reflection paper was they liked going at their own pace. However, I see an issue with that because we come down to the end of term and it's crunch time, and a lot of them, their pace was too slow. And so the parents are now, I guess, justifiably saying, well, why didn't we get notified earlier? And I'm trying to think of ways to do that, maybe do Wednesday warnings every week, but something like that doesn't seem to fit well with this format, with people being kind of on their own pace. She mentioned the so-called something like average pace, or that some people would be a little behind pace and other people would be ahead of pace. And aside, of course, from having to be caught up with all my grading, which almost never happens, I don't know how to square that with, I don't know how to square those two things.
I actually emailed Erin after the webinar myself with some questions, and that was actually one of the ones I asked her was, what happens to the kids who just get so far behind and they can't catch up? She does actually put due dates, like, you know, how she had the different levels of the grids, and she would say, like, you know, the level 1 is due by this date, to try and help the kids pace themselves. And then the kids who, as she monitored it and could see that they weren't staying on pace, she would continue to follow up with them more and more. And what she actually did in her grade book, she said, is she put the due date for, like, you know, the first level 1, the first 5 assignments or whatever. She actually put that due date in her grade book. And any student who hadn't finished it by then actually got a 0 in the grade book, so they could see that, and they could still get the points for it. It wasn't a permanent 0. So she had to sort of keep on track with the kids for exactly what you said, just to make sure kids weren't waiting till the last minute to try and do the whole thing. So that's sort of how, so she sort of did give the due dates, but you could turn it in a little bit late.
Okay, and
yeah,
along with that, for students who are behind pace, how do you plan, if you're lucky enough to have face-to-face instructions, how do you plan activities that are going to be appropriate for the behind pace, the on pace, and the ahead of pace?
And, you know, it's funny because I asked her that too. I think we must have had the same question. I think probably any language teacher who watched it had the same thing. And I emailed her that. I said, so what do you do when you're face to face? And she actually was doing this grid method before we went online. So it's not something that she just actually came up with when they went online.
Right.
So she said this is something they actually do in their class all the time. And so she would do like about 15 minutes sort of whole group presenting or whatever, you know, wherever, sort of having an idea where everybody was from watching what they were doing on their assignments. But then the rest of the class, she would do like small groups based on, so if some kids were at this point, she would meet with those students in a small group to do this, if there was an interpersonal thing. If there was something else that was a presentation, she would meet with the students who had done that. So she actually was sort of doing a personalized, independent, blended learning before we even ended up in the whole pandemic thing. So that's sort of how she did it, is she sort of kept an eye on where everybody was, spent the first part of class trying, you know, doing some whole class things, whether it's in, you know, comprehensible input or some sort of conversation, just that community building. And then she would have the kids go back into, if, you know, because they all had Chromebooks in her class, and then she would do small group work after that. So it actually helped her differentiate more than she could when she was doing an entire whole class teaching too. But those are great questions, Kat. I had the exact same ones. Anybody else who watched it, or I'm sorry, Kat, did you have anything else?
No, that's all.
Okay, good. Did anybody else watch the video or sort of look at the online course and have some questions that came up, or just thought, yeah, I like this, I see some issues? I do not, that's okay. Those of you, I see we've had a lot more people just join in the last 5 minutes. Those of you who just joined, in the chat box, there's a tinyurl.com with a grid, and it's just a sample one we're just going to mess around with today to sort of brainstorm from. Terry, do you have the link to the contact hours also? The tiny URL for the contact hours?
Don't have that one.
Oh, okay.
Is it on the ODE website somewhere?
Hang on, let me get my screen really quickly.
Okay. Or if you put up the share screen, I'll grab it.
Yeah, it's ODE-OFLA-meetup.
Okay.
Grab that. Yeah, so if you need contact hours from this one or a previous one. Did you get that?
One moment.
So as Terry's putting that into the chat box, what I did is Terry and I both did the online course for the grid method to sort of brainstorm a little bit. And then I downloaded the sample grid that they had. You good, Terry? Okay, and yeah. I'm going to go ahead. If you have the Google Doc, you can pull up the Google Doc, and I'm going to pull it on the screen also. And I'm not saying mine is right or wrong or anything. I just thought if we're going to do this, let's have something that we're all working from that's the same. So those of you who might not have seen the video, let me just give a quick crash course on how this is going to work. So the document that you see here, you're going to see two things. You see this grid on page 1. And like I said, you're welcome to just look at the screen, or you can pull it up yourself. And then on page 2, and I figured we could do a sample grid for novice mid, because that seems to be an easy one to do. So like end of level 1, beginning of level 2 for most students. And on the second page, I actually put from the new standards, on page 2 and 3, I put the new standards for novice mid. And there's a link on page 2 at the top. You can see the link for the new standards, which are very much in alignment to the can-do, the can-do statement. So if you've been using can-do statements and haven't yet checked out the new standards, they're very similar. So if you're familiar with can-dos, you're going to just glide right into the standards. I also put the link for the rubrics that we have from ODE that are proficiency based, because that might come in handy for scoring. Okay, so on the first page with the grid, this is basically the way this is the way it works. It's actually for mastery learning, which, as Terry said in the beginning, is sort of like when you have concepts that kids have to master, whereas in our languages, with languages, it's really more skills and proficiency levels. So I was sort of brainstorming, thinking, okay, maybe it would work better to align it to proficiency levels and come up with the outcomes. So this is the way the grid works. The grid has 4 levels, and you actually start at the bottom. So if you look down at the bottom level of the grid, you'll see where it says level 1. And the goal is that this is a self-paced organizational tool for kids to follow as they're doing their learning. And it's funny because OFLA, and we sent out a survey last week about what were the things that worked best for online learning, and the number one, and we asked teachers, what do you think worked best for yourself, and what do you think worked best for students? And the number one response for what worked best for students was that the students were able to work at their own pace. And that was, we had 160 responses so far, and overwhelmingly the students working at their own pace was was the number one positive benefit of working online. So the way the grid method works is, if you look at level 1, is you come up with tasks, it's all aligned to Bloom's taxonomy, that are define and recall tasks. And so, and Kat, to your question, like I added a do by on there for just that reason. So basically what it is you come up with tasks, and the LO stands for learning objective in each one. And each task or activity or whatever assessment is a little bit harder than the one before it. So the level 1 are really your sort of define and recall, your low level activities and assessments that they would do for novice mid. So if you were doing, say, a unit on, I don't know, this is travel or something like that. And so in the travel unit, those immediate skills that they need some sort of input, whether it's vocabulary or structures, or you give a cultural picture and you start talking about it. But I think for most of us, usually we begin with some sort of interpretive task to help give the kids some input to start working with. So the way the grid works is, so like the do by for level 1, maybe you decide, okay, I'm going to give the kids, there's going to be a total of 7 things they have to do. I'm going to give them 2 weeks to work on it or something like that. So the way that they set it up was like the very first learning outcome 1A, say we just made it interpretive. You come up with what the outcome is. So maybe it's, I can identify types of transportation in the target culture or something like that. The I need, Erin had this on here. I'm not sure if we necessarily would keep it or not. The I need was the materials that the kids would need. So it would be like if they had to go to a website, or if there was something in the textbook they had to look at, or if there was something around the house. So that was more of an organization for them. And then there would be some sort of assessment, like say we did reading and listening. So maybe it would be some, a video to watch, and they had to write down some words or do some comprehension questions, or there's a brochure they had to read, etc. So they would do the first task and take the assessment. She had it that if they couldn't pass the assessment, Erin did a lot of Nearpod assessments. She did Kahoot, and she had quizzes, that Quiz plus IZZ. I think Quizlet would be a good one. I think a lot of other tools, Google Classroom, whatever you're using, there's a lot of other tools. She tried to have a lot of online assessments. And the kids, I think she had it that they had to get like at least an 80 to an 85%, something like that, on the assessment before they could move on. Once they moved on, then they would go to the 1B outcome, and the same thing, and they would take the assessment. And so, like I said, I was just playing around and said, okay, maybe the first 3 would be interpretive, to really get the kids that input of whatever I want them to learn. And then maybe the 4th one would be presentational. And so maybe they've done all this input on travel, they've looked at brochures, they've looked at the weather, and maybe they're presentational. So this is novice mid. Maybe they're presentational as they have to, list items they would take on a packing trip, or they would pack for a trip to the target culture or something like that. And then she had the 1E goal was an assessment over everything that was in A, B, C, and D. And the students could take as many attempts as they needed. And the same thing, I think she had a minimum score that they had to get before they could go on to the next level. So the goal was that it was self-paced, because if the kids could whip right through it and score everything, they could go right through and just keep going. If other students struggled a little bit, they could keep redoing things over and over until they hit the scores that she needed. And again, since there was so much assessing, she had a lot of, especially at this lower level, she had a lot of electronic type things, like I mentioned, like Nearpod and Edpuzzle and things like that, where the kids, it was electronically scored. And Terry, I don't have the chat box up, so if something comes up in the chat box, let me know, okay? So once the kids mastered level 1, then you went to the grid, you went to level 2. And so you notice level 2 goes a little bit higher. It goes into apply and demonstrate. So thinking about this from the world language point of view, okay, apply and demonstrate, maybe now we're going to do some presentational writing or speaking, something a little higher level than just, like listing a packing list or something, maybe something a little bit higher. And then maybe there's some sort of interpersonal that they either do with me or they do on Flipgrid. Hang on for a second, I got somebody with a question here. Hang on for a second, let me pull up the chat so I can see the chat. Second. I can't get the chat. Terry, can you handle that for me? I can't see the chat.
I sure can. Kat has a question. Does she have different forms of the assessment so that they don't just memorize the answers when they come back the second time?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. I know she talked about that. Terry, do you remember what she said about that?
I don't remember. I think she said she had 2 or 3 different types of assessment.
Okay.
Or different versions of the same assessment. But
okay.
I think with language, if you're just asking them to respond to something and it's not just a right or wrong answer, then you want them to write and complete sentences, and then you wouldn't have to change it. You would just have them keep trying.
Yeah, I think it would depend. You're right. That would be something to sort of think out about, okay, what type of assessment, which is what we're here for today, to start brainstorming things like
Right.
this. I see D Lion has a question. How do you hide the next step? Actually, you don't. The kids have the grid in front of them the entire time. Is that what you meant on that
Yeah,
one?
I think that. Darlene,
is that what you meant on that one?
Hi, yeah, I did. And that's kind of what I did during all of this online learning. And I found that the kids didn't work to their level. They just did it and went on to the next one. And then they did it and went on to the next one. And then by the time they got to like step E, they had still messed up on step A and they weren't getting anywhere. They just were shooting for the end. And that's
I see what you're saying. Okay.
How do you keep them from keep them so they get their 80% and actually learn something before they go on?
That's a good question. And like I said, I don't have the answers because this is as new to me as all of you. So that's why with these questions, if anyone wants to jump in and comment, please do. What does anybody, Susan, go ahead and share.
Susan.
Yeah, in terms of being able to evaluate that, I'm really checking out Flipgrid, which I love. I just thought it was the greatest thing I could find with kids recording things. And I think at the end of an assessment, with a quick prompt, they cannot memorize everything. And if I tell them, I give them a certain amount of time to practice, and we've been talking about, okay, let's say food with the environment, with plants and all kinds of things, and give them about 3 prompt questions, and let them think about it, let them think about their vocabulary, practice whatever they need. But then I then put it on the Flipgrid as to please record yourself on, and please look at the camera showing me you're not reading it. And I like the fact that they have to master enough to fill a minute, which is a long time for these kids, to talk about some things that they've learned about over the last 2-3 weeks. So I'm going to use a lot of the recording things for kids, with and without, their partners. And I'm trying to figure out how they can have little conversations where they can post theirs and practice their themes and then do it again later.
I'm trying to do, I have two computers, so I apologize that I keep turning my head away. I'm trying to like do both so I can see the chat. Somebody just mentioned that their math, and every time I try to go to the chat, my screen goes away. Somebody mentioned their math department does that.
That's Denise.
Denise, do you want to talk about, like, have you talked to them about how that works?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, they've done that for like 3 or 4 years, and they're going to actually flip trig this year too. The kids actually don't like it, even though they learn a lot. So what happens is they do go at their own pace, and they know they have to be at a certain point and able to pass, like by the end of the semester. And they get to take tests over and over and over again. And they do have a lot of different tests that they take. So they have videos that they watch at home for the concepts that the teachers have made. And then when they come to class, that's when they actually do the worksheets and things. And they are able to just keep taking tests, but they can't move on until they have passed. Like they can't move on to the next concept till they have like an 80% in the current concept, but they're all at different levels.
So did they mention the issue that Darlene came up with, that what if a kid is like, I can get a 60 and I'm still going on to the next one? Or
But you know what, they teach it like that during regular school, and so I haven't seen them to ask them.
oh, okay.
They must have something in place, because I'm sure it continued during the online learning.
Yeah, that's a good question. If you happen to talk to them and could like shoot me an email and let me know, because I think, I mean, I guess it could get down to that the student doesn't get a grade in their grade book until, you know, that, you know, you're not going to get your 1B grade until you've passed your 1A thing or something. I'm not
Right, I can send an email. I know when they started it like 4 or 5 years ago, the parents hated it, the kids hated it, but now they have it. Now they have it down to a science, and that's the only way they teach algebra in our school. And they're also doing the same with trig. I just found out this coming year.
Yeah, I think the one thing it does help is it helps when, like, those of us who have, well, we all have that. We have the kids who in our class who get it, you know, and are ready to move on. And then we have the other
Right.
students who just struggle, which was what the appeal was to this one, I thought, with the ability to sort of do a full class, and it could go very quickly to blended, because if in a minute your school closes down for the pandemic, you can transfer over. I also like the fact, like you said, that teachers were actually doing this before the online. They didn't come up with it because of the online. They were actually already doing
Right.
something like this.
Right. And we use our learning management system as Blackboard. And I know with that, they are able to put in multiple tests. So the kids don't know that they're going to get the same test all the time.
Would Google Classroom allow for something like that, or Schoology, whatever most people are using?
I don't know, because we don't have that. We have Blackboard as our learning management system.
Oh, okay. All right. Anyone with Google Classroom, does that sound, I know that seemed to be the majority LMS that most districts were using from our survey. Does that sound like something that would be doable on Google Classroom, that you could have several assessments?
I believe it would be doable on Google Classroom.
Okay. And Ms. Pandolfi, good. Susan, you wanted to share something you said?
Yeah, with regards to math, you know, they can do a lot of worksheets or a lot of things independently, but when we're doing a language, I'm struggling with them, you know, watching things at home and then coming in to be assessed and not speaking and not having activities. Like, what is the balance there?
And I think that's where, I'm looking at cat. Okay, I think that's where the thing is, kids can do interpretive on their own. If they're watching videos, if they're having to read something, they can do it over and over and have it, like I said, in the video or in the webinar, Erin had a lot of stuff embedded into like a Nearpod. I think that's what she used, Nearpod or Pear Deck, one of the two, where the kids would watch the video and answer questions. And Ed Puzzle is another one where they would keep doing it, where the kids could watch it over and over. So the interpretive piece is something kids can do on their own when it's something from like a video, not something that the teacher's saying. And then the speaking would come into the class together, or as you look at the one on level 1 on this, that they do 3 interpretive activities and a presentational, and the presentational is based on the things that they did in the interpretive. Is that what you're saying, Susan?
Yeah, I just was listening to the math thing and it just sounded like they were on so many different levels that when they were coming in, the majority of it was, doing worksheets and their own assessments. And I would just hate to see class time go away from, I know that they're all on at least a base level
Right.
that, we should be doing, I need to be doing activities where they can practice it out loud, not just, being seen for assessments.
Kathy and Susan, I'm thinking that for this to work in a language classroom, it's while we're still in crisis mode. If we're not together day after day after day, I can't see that we ever want to replace that communication between the teacher and the students when they're in the classroom with us, except on rare occasions.
Right. And yeah, and I think that's not the point of it with this. I think it is to allow for, especially if you're in the classroom, is that you do have time where you're together as a class. And like you said, with hopefully with something with the due dates or the pacing, sometimes it's going to be whole class. Like I said, maybe at the beginning it is whole class where you're doing a story or you're doing, a picture and stuff like that. Maybe the first 20 minutes, and then you break into small groups, and then you work with, okay, I see the students who I see the students who have completed through level or 1D. I'm going to work with those students in some small groups while the other kids are working on their Chromebook. So I personally think there's room for both, where we do that community building in part of the class, but we also allow for the self-paced with the students who are able to go beyond where we are with that. And that's just my personal opinion. I'm not, like I'm saying, I'm not right or wrong. I'm looking at Denise, Charlala and Fluent Key. Yeah, I think Fluent Key, I think is like Ed Puzzle, and someone help me out with that, because I know Lisa Shepard does the Fluent Key, but I've never actually gone in because you had to sign up for an account and I didn't want to sign up. Has anyone used Fluent Key, or is it Charlala? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Sarah, what do you think? Do you think that like Fluent Key, I know Ed Puzzle would work for something like this. I know Kahoot, she used Nearpod, Kahoot, and Quizzes, and all three of them had where you could embed things into it. It gave you a class report, and the kids couldn't move on in the assessment unless, like in the video, they couldn't go to the end of the video until they got answered the questions. Sarah, what do you think?
I personally, I've tried both. I tried them both at the beginning of the remote learning. And Fluent Key, I thought it was more difficult. It does offer the same things as Ed Puzzle, but I thought Ed Puzzle was just easier to use.
Okay.
Basically, it boils down to that for me.
Okay. Beta,
Katie,
yeah.
Katie, as a parent,
yeah,
who's been on both sides of the educational system,
mm-hmm.
I am wondering, how are our teachers, our educators, are handling situations where you have the online mixed with at-home training, and you got two sets of kids there? You got a double piece. What kind of feedback are you getting to help us as parents help you with really preparing our kids going forward for this? Because there's a standard that even at home, when you're teaching at home, that we got to meet, because the state is not going to accept our kids sitting around watching TV.
So any teachers want to jump in on that? I have some viewpoints from the ODE side, but teachers, do you want to jump in? Lonnie, just sort of summarize your question one more time from the parent point of view.
From the parent point of view, we want to truly be partners. In order for our kids to adhere with the standards, whether it is at-home teaching or online instructions, how can our educators make sure that those of us who are juggling at-home teaching, and we got a kid that's part of the regular school system,
right.
So that it's hard to pair that because of you're trying to make sure that you're working with the standards, but it calls for an hour here, and this child is doing one thing, and here you got your books and all the educational material working with the child here. So as parents, it is a juggle, and I'm just trying to figure out how can we do this in a manner where it would be the same type of processes that will meet the state standard for both children in the home.
Yeah, I think Karen Karen, if you want to jump in, Karen put a great comment in there about one of the issues is that kids were not going into the office hours. They weren't going in for help. I know teachers were offering office hours for parents, et cetera, too. And granted, it was sort of a crisis situation. So we know that things just didn't work the way they did. The goal, Karen, do you want to jump in, actually? Oh, your microphone's not working, you said, sorry. Okay, I think the difference, and this is what, from talking to the hundreds of teachers I've talked to, and I sit in on the superintendent meetings, I sit in on the principal meetings, I sit in on the ESD meetings, is the difference is going to be in the fall that we're planning for it versus in the spring. It was just everybody do what you can do because there was no choice. I think it is though going to have to come down to what can I do that is, I can do it online in a flash. I can do it in the classroom in a flash with an easy transition before. Sharon, go ahead. Sharon, jump in. If you don't mind.
Oh, I just typed in something.
Right, yeah.
That this actually wasn't in, I've been doing lots of these little webinars and things, but this actually came from, and it really stuck with me. I went to the iCulture webinar.
Right, so did I. Yep.
And I think that, like I wrote in my chat, if people can't read it, the main point that they came across is we can alter the task to allow students to work at their own pace and not sacrifice the content. We have to be thinking, no matter what we use, grid method, digital notebooks, choice boards, what is the final product we want kids to produce? What's the output? So, just trying to figure this out. I know it's difficult because our school district just met yesterday and started discussing things, A/B schedule next year. And Google Meets was a big topic of discussion of getting kids involved. And we've gotten to the point of discussing that maybe the hours are going to have to change. Getting kids in our classrooms, especially high schoolers, at 7:45 in the morning isn't realistic. But yeah, I just put that out there just to kind of, just things that I'm seeing, and it's overwhelming. It definitely is overwhelming. How do we support our parents and support our kids at the same time and get them from point A to point B at the end? And
I know. I'm sorry, Sharon, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Sorry. No, and at the end of the day, it is, what's the output? What do we want the kids to be able to do? So that's just stuck with me.
Yeah, I know some of the conversations that I've heard, and this is for Lonnie and pretty much as a parent and as a teacher, because I also have a child who, luckily I was at ODE. I wasn't trying to teach, so I'm working from home from ODE, but it's a little bit easier than trying to teach from home with a child. And one of the conversations that I have heard superintendents and principals and ODE talking about is the fact that there is going to be some sort of face-to-face in the fall, which is different than how it was in the spring. And that means that the beginning of the year is going to have to be, whether it's some meetings for parents to come in and say, this is how, the system is going to work, whether we're all using Google Meets or we're using Google Classroom or Blackboard, whatever, or Canvas, whatever we're using, that the teacher will have time with the students face-to-face to help them learn the platforms and do it with them before they're set off on their own. I think, that was obviously the big thing, is everybody went home and these kids had to try and parents had to learn it on their own. So I think the difference, number one, is going to be that there's time to prepare for it mentally, that we are going to have the kids and the parents able to come into the school, whether it's in groups or whatever, to learn the process before being sent off on their own to do it. The other advantage, especially for students who may, for example, have a Chromebook but don't have internet access, is that if the students are in school, can we come up with materials that students can download to their Chromebook, or they can bring a USB and we can put materials on a USB, so when they go home, they can do some of these things without having to have the internet. It's not a perfect solution. So Lonnie, your question is a great question, and I know it's being discussed across all avenues. And I think the difference is that we are going to actually have time to think about it, and we're going to actually have people face-to-face to actually work with them versus just sending you home.
Well, I'm truly worried about it, to be honest with you, in a deeper dive, because as parents, with the COVID situation, we are truly worried about this kind of thing going back. And classroom size is another issue.
Right.
You know, prep time. You guys don't have enough prep time. And they did cut back the hours in the district. And it's like, oh my God, how are we really going to get things done to meet the mandates? And I just wish we had more parent voices that support our teachers, because it is a tough slide. It really is. It
Yeah.
really.
Sharon, did you want to jump in again?
No, and you guys were talking about how are we going to get these kids on board and everything. And again, I'm going to go back to my meeting yesterday with my district, because we are seriously looking at what a lot of districts are looking at is an A-B schedule. And how do, like when the B students aren't there, how do we get them in the classroom? And one of the things you can do, and the beauty is, and this is good for parents to know, we just like you can do with Zoom, we can record our meetings. And we've discussed, if the kid can't come to the meeting, you know, recording the meeting for the kids. So, and then having them some accountability in that sense, that they can actually show that they've watched the video. You know, maybe they can't get on at 8, maybe it's later in the day, that we're going to have to be flexible in that sense, but that we want them to get the same content the whole week through, so, you know, that they can be a part of that. Another thing that we have been talking about too is, and this is good for a parent to hear, one of the main issues is you were talking about paper versus online and stuff. We as teachers felt like, as long as kids have cell phones, that we need their cell phone numbers, because we really need to be able to talk to the kids directly. So that'll take some burden off the parents, because we felt like sometimes we would communicate with the parent and try to go back and, you know, and the communication would, you know, they'd say, we're going to take care of this. And then you wouldn't hear anything. And eventually the parents are done with hearing from you. But I did find those students that I was able to contact directly was really beneficial to getting them on board. So that is something we've looked at.
Let's see here. There's some good questions going in there. Let's go back. Let's take these things that we've just been talking about, because these are serious issues that everyone needs to address. And let's think of, and not necessarily, like I said, it's not necessarily like the grid method, but I think the thing about teachers, how are we going to do this with reduced hours? How are we going to do when we record our classes and some kids aren't there? I think those issues right there are things that are going to be alleviated, and it's not going to be perfect, but by having the kids take more autonomy for what they're doing. I think the one thing that has come up from all this from the spring is that personalized learning and the teacher not having to be 100% in charge of the class has to change. It just cannot work. And even if we came back and were there 100%, I think some practices that, you know, have sort of been talked about in the past about kids really taking autonomy and being able to move, I think we've all seen that there's some value in that. So I just sort of want to bring the conversation with, I want to take your needs and let's bring it back to things that we can actually do in the classroom. And so looking at something like this, whether it is a grid or something that's self-paced, or whether it's I do sort of online and not online, let's talk about how something like that could work with the needs that have been brought up. The master grid template is in the chat box. It's a Google Doc that Terry put on there. Right, putting the videos in Edpuzzle would accountability. I'm trying to look at some of those. Just to get back to the grid, the way it was working, so I can summarize the whole process, and then let's talk about it in the broader sense of how are things going to work in the fall, and is this something along these lines, some sort of self-paced or independent personalized learning? How is that going to play in? So as you look at this, it was pretty straightforward that the kids would complete level 1. Each task. When they went to level 2, you'll notice the level 2 went to apply and demonstrate. So there's a lot more presentational, interpersonal, presentational. It doesn't mean that in those types of assessments that interpretive wouldn't be involved, because it could be watch a video and talk about what you saw, or do some sort of comparison, or, you know, what do you do here? And then again, your goal for the assessment at the end of level 2 would cover everything in level 1 and level 2. So it's constantly spiraled. I think someone mentioned that earlier about it's not like a one-off, that the assessment at the end of level 2 covers everything that the students have done in level 1 and 2. When you get to the level 3 part of the grid, we're still at novice mid, but notice now that it's bumped up. And this is truly where we are. Like I said, I have the standards are on the 2nd and 3rd page. So if you want to scroll through the standards, you can look at those. But the second part, or the 3rd level, is where it really gets to the true deeper part, where the students are comparing and contrasting. They're doing interpersonal, sorry, I got a typo in there, presentational. And then at the end of level 3 is where you actually have the assessment over the unit. So it's going to incorporate the 4 modes. It's going to, the 4 skills, the 3 modes, the culture. It's going to incorporate everything that you've done. So when Erin was doing it, the expectation was that every student finished level 3. I'm just trying to, yeah, Terry, just jump in if there's something under that I have to go in the chat. By the end of level 3 is what everybody was expected to do. And like I said, she had the due dates. If kids were getting too far off track, like she said, most of her kids, except for a few exceptions, most of the kids stayed more or less close to the pace that she set for them, for the reason that someone mentioned earlier, that a lot of times, especially if you have like freshmen or 7th graders or something, or little kids, it's hard for them to pace themselves. The level 4, the infer and predict, which was actually, and like I said, I just threw anything in red is stuff that I just threw in to say, hey, let's talk about this, is no one was expected to have to do level 4, but if they were done, they could move on and start doing the level 4 thing. So if you had native speakers, if you have kids who just, they're like, I'm done and it's been 2 weeks and I have the entire thing done, there was this level 4 that actually was helping the students move up to the next proficiency level, into novice, mid, or high. The other thing
Christina wanted to share something.
Yeah, Christina, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just answering Lonnie's question. As a parent and as a teacher, I get it. I was beyond overwhelmed. And I think a lot of it comes down to that we just stopped. We abruptly stopped. Right. And then we didn't get to prep the students. We didn't get to prep the parents. We didn't get to prep ourselves. We just had to figure it out and jump right in and go with it. I've learned a lot over this time. I had an ugly parent moment with my son's teacher. It's embarrassing, I admit it. But I think I've learned a lot, and I've shared that with my superintendent and with my administration, and said, look, my child, I had 2 children. One who's doing fine on his own, he can do his own work, but I have a younger child with special needs. And as a parent, I kept going, I can teach the majority of this, but who's going to teach my kid math? I need somebody here teaching my child math, because it's not going to be me. Because I can't. So I think we've learned a lot, and I think it's going to look a lot different in the fall, just because you learn from your mistakes, and we had to just jump right into it, and we didn't know where we were going.
Right. Yep. Jennifer, PM, I think, is private message, if someone said that to you.
Yeah. Beth has a comment that I think.
Yeah, Beth, go ahead with yours.
Beth would share.
Yeah, Beth, go ahead. I think you talked about the language in the grid, right?
Well, you just asked for feedback specific to the grid, and I was just looking at that, and somebody had mentioned, having the kids having some organization to their work and all that, and I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking of my students. If I had my AP students, they're familiar with some of the terminology, proficiency levels and all that, so they'd be able to piece this together, I think. But my incoming Spanish 2 is, if I threw this at them, because it seems like this is something for the students to use, right?
Right.
Yeah. If my incoming Spanish 2s, who haven't even had a whole year of Spanish yet, looking at this, they have no idea what novice, mid, and interpretive and presentational, things like that. It would take me a week to train them in the terminology on this. So I agree that giving them some type of organizational thing. I mean, my own kids has said organization over the quarantine time was a huge component of everything, trying to organize all their work and their assignments for this teacher and that teacher, and what platform, who was on Schoology, who was on Google Classroom, and organization was a major learning curve for everybody, So you asked about this particular grid. I don't think most of my students would appreciate this, because you know, they know the I can statements and things, so they'd be able to piece that in there. But I think this could be kind of confusing for them. I would have to simplify this or something, and this could be something I could use, you know, getting feedback from them. And okay, my student said I can do this, I can do, you know, what I can statements and things did they give me? But
I wonder if it goes back to Darlene's question about what do you do if the kids keep going on, and maybe it is something like you said, until the kids get a little more trained on it, is that maybe you only give them, oh, before I go on, I'm going to come back to that, Beth. Someone just asked, the level 1 does not mean like French 1, French 2, French 3. What it means is this is like a level 1 of the assignments that they're doing for the unit. So the level 1, I know that was confusing and I couldn't think of another word, but that's what she used. That means it's sort of like level 1 difficulty of the task. They're define and recall. And then it goes up to level 2 difficulty of task. So it doesn't apply to.
I just mean whatever you are using it in, just I'm like novice mid.
Yeah, someone else said that, Beth. But I think you're right. Maybe it is that, okay, I give, you know, the kids who this might be a little bit much for, or at least in the beginning, is that I give them, whether it's something like this or whatever, that it's sort of like what I think a lot of teachers did do, is you gave the assignments on Monday and you said everything's due by Friday, which is actually similar to what this is, except that you're sort of giving them like a month's worth, or like a month's worth of assignments at once. So you're right. Maybe it is something that the teacher has the full view of it, and the kids just get a little bit at a time. They get much more student-friendly language. I think you're right on task or right on target with that, Beth.
Well, Kathy, you had suggested that if we look at the choice board that we posted, you posted your at the early part of this and put the choices in there, then that might be something that is more student friendly.
Yeah, Terry and I were talking a lot about this, and we were thinking, what if you did something similar to this, where they had, but each one had like that, just that first row or that bottom row with the 5 things or whatever was a choice board, and they had just 1 or 2 to pick from at each level. Was another option, because I know the choice boards were really popular. I heard that, I mean, it seems like every teacher who mentioned it said that they sort of worked. I don't know. Let's throw out some. I'm just keeping an eye on the time because we only got about 10 minutes. I want to respect your afternoon and your summer. Let's throw out some other comments. Just, and like I said, it not necessarily has to be the grid method, but I'm just thinking about the self-paced, the choice. What are your thoughts on that, or what have you done that works? Yeah, that opportunity to give feedback with Flipgrid is helpful also. But so just sort of looking at this, you know, it just sort of giving you what the goal was for how this, you know, how this self-paced model worked. What are just some thoughts on, I don't know, what works, what doesn't work, what can we do for the fall? What are you guys thinking? If you want to share, just type share in the chat box. Yeah, Darlene.
Yeah. So as I'm looking at this and thinking about everything we've just said over the last 45 minutes, it's similar to what my district kind of set up and told us we kind of had to use. They wanted us to have a common template for all classes.
Okay.
And so like we had a 4-day-a-week thing, and one half was the goal or the can-do type statement, and the other half was the student work or engagement or what they were supposed to do. And they kind of worked it through in a similar way. Like the first day was, you know, you give them some basics, and then the second day was they start applying it, and the third day, or like the second day was instruction, you know, like the get them enthused, and then they give them some instruction, and then let them practice it, and then the assessment was for the last day, which was supposed to last 2 days or whatever. So it's a similar idea, and it is a great setup for us to kind of work through. But again, you know, you give the kids the whole week ahead of time, and they shoot for the last one, and they don't do any of the practice. And I'm just, you know, and again, it might be different in the fall when we all can see them face to face, but for me, this is so much like what I've already done, and they're just gonna jump ahead and just frustrate me to no end.
Okay, so some strategies and that's another thing to keep in mind, is everybody's situation is different. Let's see. I'm looking at some of the comments because they're really good. And yeah, Susan mentioned, you know, different levels. It might work different ways. Oh, I know the other thing that Erin said that she did is she actually, before they started each unit and like she did the grid or whatever, the kids actually were allowed to take a pre-assessment that sort of covered, I guess, the stuff that they were going to be doing or the skills or something like that. And again, it's different because she's a science teacher versus language. So it's a little bit different. But if the kids pre-tested at a certain level, they could skip some of the like lower level tasks and move on like to letter D instead of starting with A or something. Just another thing that she threw out there. Somebody else had something I was looking at. Oh yeah, Sharon, your thing about engaging, and that's exactly it. That's a risk that would come with something like this, is that it's not, like someone said, it's not just a bunch of worksheets and stuff that's busy work. It's truly, when they're doing it, they're watching a video that's, and the input could simply be, I know if there's a lot of teachers who do, the CI and tell stories, and maybe one of the inputs is the teacher doing the story. Whether it's recorded on the video, the teacher does it live with the kids, but also records it for the kids. Because let's face it, some kids are not going to come back to school, and some parents are not going to let their kids go back to school in the fall, depending on where things are health-wise. So I think that's another option too, is it doesn't always have to be that it's me giving you a video to watch. It could be the teacher recording yourself and talking to the kids or something too. But I think, Sharon, your point is very well taken, that it has to be things that are meaningful. It's not just here's a worksheet and here's this, et cetera. So, and it could be like some of that base level, like maybe in there, like for example, 1A, maybe 1A is the very basic where they're just learning some vocab. And so there's some sort of interpretive vocab that you're doing with a story or a video, but then maybe one of the activities under there is that they go in and do Quizlet and practice some structures in the cards, or they do, something else in there. So I don't know, I'm looking at the comments. There's great comments going on here. What's everybody else? What else is on?
Martha would like to share.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm not currently teaching in Ohio. I just moved from Michigan. My first question is, with the AB schedule you're talking about, is this an every other day schedule?
I think that's what people, yeah, that like part of the kids would come on A day and part of the kids would come on B day, I think is what it is, yeah.
Yes, I did teach that. That was my previous job.
Yeah.
And so the pacing is different and you have to loop a lot, which
Right.
this grid method will help with.
Okay.
It'll also keep you organized as the teacher, because that is a big factor in teaching an every other day class schedule.
Yeah. I think, who was it? I think it was Sharon. Did you say that you're recording your classes, that the teachers record themselves and post it? And even if you're doing an AB schedule and you're teaching the same thing twice, now the kids have 2 different recordings to watch, and if they missed it one day or if they aren't coming in at all. Yeah,
Yes.
It's just, I think you hit some key things, that it's going to be a different organizational structure. We may not be able to cover all the typical things you think you cover in like level 3. It is probably going to have to be a lowering of how much we cover versus, going more in depth with what we do.
Can I just say, I'm sorry, one more thing?
Yes, of course, go ahead.
One of the things that we did do is, instead of presenting it like a grid, we had circles or a different type of organizational system all set up as I can statements, which we've all used. And then when we went back to assess them, we would say, we're going to assess you on 5 of these bubbles, and we won't tell you which of the 5 it is. So the kids would have to prepare for all 5 things.
Okay.
On the day of the assessment, we would, in the class, roll a dice. And if it came up or if it came up 3 on the dice, then that's the assessment they would have. So they would have to prepare themselves for everything and not skip around.
Okay, that's good too.
Yeah.
Lonnie, did you have someone wanted to share? All right, that was Martha, right?
Yeah, I just typed in something in the box,
okay.
and it basically states that this is a great roadmap. You got to have something in place to move the goals and objective forward. And this assess tool is, for me, it's a great thing. It's more than a great starter, because now it gives our educators an opportunity to see where our kids fall in the scheme of things. Who needs the extra help? Who needs more counseling? Where should that piece is going? Which, may I again say, because sometimes we forget when we have this great passion, it got to have a component that makes us as parents part of the solution.
Right.
It has to, because any document you look at, it seems like it's all shift toward the educators.
Right.
And yeah, somewhere along the line, yeah, we'll mention, but if we don't take ownership or partnership in working with you, it just will not work out, because then at the end, the parents come back and waggle their fingers at you like, see, you forgot about my poor little child. And in seriousness, we have a cadre of people, our kids, who need help. Boy,
Yeah.
I know it was touched on, but think about kids with disability. And we
Yeah.
with kids with disability. Oh my God.
Right.
Boy,
Yeah.
that is truly a special group that has to have a lot more attention paid to it. Because,
Right.
you know, if you're looking at what I think the law says, each child must have an equal opportunity and equal education. So, gosh, I hate painting things. The problem is when you have been on both sides of the fence, it is a juggling act. And I'm telling you, in today's time, you know,
Yeah.
math, science, language, whatever it is, boy,
Mhm.
oh boy, it is so far over my head now.
And I think a lot of teachers are in the same boat as you, that they're not only teaching their students, they're teaching their own children also. I want to go on to the question about the grades, because I did, somebody put that about, is it like an A or a B or whatever? I did ask Erin about what she did for grading. And she said, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I know it's coming close to 4:30. So if you have to leave, like I said, this is recorded. I'll try and get it up. I've never recorded on Zoom, so I'm not quite sure how long it takes to get it posted. So, but I promise I'll get it up hopefully within like 1 or 2 days. What was I going to say now with this? Oh, with the grading. So Erin said what she did was, like, each of the learning objectives just for her grade book was worth 10 points in the grade book, basically. And then each assessment at the end of the level 1 task and the end of the level 2 task, each assessment I think was worth like 25 points. And then the unit assessment was worth 50. She just did that to make everything sort of easy in the grade book. I know for us, and this is why on page 2, I put the link to the proficiency rubrics from ODE, is because we could actually assess it. Yes, we could, make it 50 points or whatever, but we could also assess it. Did the student hit novice mid with what they're able to do? And that's where we're getting back into that proficiency-based grading, which is whether we say it's an 80% or we say, okay, I'm using a novice mid rubric, and you hit, and the rubrics from ODE actually have novice mid even broken down into 1, 2, and novice mid 1, 2, and 3. And so if the goal is you have to hit novice mid 2 in order to move on, and if you can't, then go back and do a few more activities to practice some more and then come back again. So I think that's what's nice to lend itself to more proficiency-based grading versus point grading, is that, if there was a blend of maybe some points in there, perhaps, but then the actual assessments at the end of each level of tasks is actually based on the rubric for proficiency, really is going to help us with the, proficiency-based grading. So does the unit assessment? Yes. Yeah. So the way, and like I said, this is just the way Erin had it set up and the way they had it on the thing. Is like, that's the one thing about this, is you could totally change it however you want, which is why I put it in Google's, because I figured you guys can just download it and then you can do whatever you want. But yes, the unit assessment came at the end of the level 3, and the unit assessment encompassed everything that was in all 3 levels. So it was truly a unit assessment. So if the goal at the end of unit 3 was, I can plan a trip, I can read a couple travel brochures and, whatever, answer some information on it, watch a couple travel videos. I can plan a trip or tell when I'm going to do an itinerary for 5 days. And I can have a conversation, if you brought the interpersonal in there, where I explain what I did during the trip or something. So yes, it would cover everything. So exactly, the unit assessment would be similar to an IPA, or maybe you want to make it a project. I mean, that's the thing that's nice about languages, is that you have so many alternative ways to assess. It doesn't always have to be an IPA or that type of test. Sometimes you're like, I just want to have the kids do a project this time. I'm looking at here. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Desiree, you're right. There's so much in there. Displaced, will not be able to destroy the child's developmental. Right, exactly. And yes, Shannon, the goal is that by the end of the assessment, yes. And so you can see on the individual, like the A, B's, and C's, before they get to that final goal are all more sort of formative assessments across the different skills. And then when they get to the end goal at the end of each level, yes, it's more of a proficiency performance-based assessment. Yeah. Right, Sharon, that's exactly it. It's the backward design process. Exactly, right. So when you're planning, and you're right, when you're planning your grid, you almost really would plan it starting with level 3C is where you would plan it and work backwards from that part of the backward design. Right. Okay, it is past 4:30 and I want to respect your time. Are there any, and like I said, I put this in there. If you go to the PowerPoint where I put the slides, I think the very first slide of Erin's PowerPoint, she had the links to, there's like a free sort of online grid method. I went through it. I was able to skip like the first 5 or 6, I think it was a module. I think it had 8 modules. It was pretty easy to go through like the 5 or 6 till you get to the meat of it, which was like, I think 6, 7, and 8 or something, where they actually got down to the down and dirty. So if it looks like something you're interested in as far as just the self-paced, I think it had a lot of really good information about how to do self-paced learning, which I really liked. Any other, yes, I'll save the chat. Yeah, Brian, could you put up the link to our resource center? Because if you go to Ryan's gonna put the link for the resource center, and if you go to the resource center and scroll all the way down to where I have the links for all the meetups, there's a link in there to the slides for this. Okay, Beth, email me. Yes, I'll take your huge brainstorm, Beth. All right, I will share, I will save the chat and post that in the same place I always post everything else. Just go to that meetups page that Ryan's putting in there. And the video, once I figure out how to, I know ODE has a YouTube channel. Once I figure out how to post it, I'll get that posted too. But enjoy your day. It's a gorgeous day. I hope those of you who are out of school are at least getting a little bit of relaxation. There is a webinar on this tomorrow. With Erin, the teacher who did it, but and they're breaking it out with like science, ELA, and social studies, which is why we did a world language one today. But if you want to have more questions for Erin, she's doing the webinar tomorrow. It's on the same page where all the ODE virtual meetups are listed, and you can actually see hers tomorrow too at 3:30. As far as other PD, we're gonna give everyone a couple weeks off. I just did today because the one that's tomorrow. But then we have some things we're gonna start at the end of June, and I do have something lined up for project-based learning. We have some things lined up for the standards. We have some things, we got a baby with Terry. We got some different things lined up based on the survey that we sent out. Yeah, let me I was afraid trying to do the interactive notebook at the same time would be too much. Let me get in touch with her and see, Lisa, let me get in touch with her and see if she'd be willing to do a little chatting with us also. I think that's a good idea. Okay, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to save the chat.
Kathy, also OFLA is working on a list of things that we can provide this summer and this fall.
Perfect.
So that we can be ready to go when September arrives.
Yeah, I know the biggest needs that came up from the survey so far, like I said, for the teachers, the biggest needs that came up were something that can go from blended to the classroom in a snap. Was really literally the largest thing. The other one was ways to do interpersonal when we end up online. And then the third biggest one, I think, was how to not be overloaded with hours and hours of grading. Those were the top 3 that definitely came through. So your survey responses were helpful. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Enjoy your day. And like I said, we'll send out and we'll start doing some PD again in a couple weeks that's geared for helping to prep for next fall. So thanks, everybody.